Aaron Volpatti's journey to the NHL is not your typical story of grit and hard work on the ice. As a teenager, Aaron was involved in a horrific accident that nearly ended his life. During a camping trip, he attempted to perform a stunt and accidentally set himself on fire. Aaron suffered severe burns to over 40% of his body, putting his life and his dreams of an Ivy League education at risk. But it was in the hospital, through pain and recovery, that he discovered the power of visualization. While doctors told him that he might not ever play hockey again, Aaron imagined himself back on the ice, pushing through rehab with mental strength to try and earn a hockey scholarship. Now, against all odds, Aaron not only recovered to play at Brown University, but he made it all the way to the NHL, playing for the Vancouver Canucks and the Washington Capitals. After retiring, he turned his experience into a powerful tool for helping others, writing his book, Fighter, Defying the NHL Odds, where he shares how visualization transformed his life. Today, he coaches athletes and individuals on mastering their mindset to overcome challenges, just like he did. This is Aaron Volpatti's second story. Welcome to Second Story, everybody. I'm Josh Cybulski, joined by Corey Leckie. Corey, what's going on, bud?
Hey, Josh. What's happening, man?
Not much, dude. Excited to get into today's episode. It's kind of a funny story of how I actually stumbled across this story. I don't know why I worded that so weird. I was actually given this gentleman's book about a year ago. There's this older guy who lives up the street from me who always passes along hockey books, and I'll read them and then pass them along to my mom's boyfriend. And I read this book probably about a little over a year ago, and then like I always do, passed it along. We hadn't yet started the podcast, so it was probably more than a year ago. Passed it along, and then I got a message like maybe a month or two ago from my mom's boyfriend. It's like, do you have any plans to interview this guy? And I was like, oh, right. His story fits the mold exactly of the show that we're trying to make. So I'll stop keeping people in suspense. So we're joined today by former NHLer. He's a visualization and performance coach. He's the author of the book Fighter, Defying the NHL Odds. His name is Aaron Volpatti. Aaron, what's up?
Not much, man. Thanks for having me on, guys. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
And it's always good to hear these different, I guess, stories of how the book gets to certain people and the impact that it has, all over the world, really, which is really cool. So glad you read it. Glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, awesome. Corey's been reading it the past few days to get ready for this. So it's Corey's not a hockey fan. I don't think he can name one hockey player besides you. To be honest with you.
Hey, no judgment.
Would you, Corey?
You're not supposed to tell him that.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, the audience already knows that.
I am a fan of really good books, though, and I'm telling you, this thing is just it. Like, I am stuck on it. It's so good. I think I'm on chapter 23 right now.
Well, I appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Yeah, it really is an incredible book, an incredible story, and we can't wait to dive into it. So we are Second Story. We talk with people who have gone through a major change in their life that sent them down a different path. And Aaron, I'm very excited to share your story. So if you would, go ahead and share it.
Yeah, I mean, man, I can start a lot of different places. I think interestingly, my second story probably isn't, hockey and my burn injury that led me to the NHL, as you know, through reading the book. I think it's probably more life after hockey and just discovering who is Aaron Volpatti, not the hockey player, you know. So I think that's been a lot of learning, kind of connecting more on like the emotional, spiritual side. And I would say the first story is me as the hockey player. So where do you guys want to start? Like, we can I'll maybe start with the first, and then we can kind of roll into the second maybe. But yeah, both have been different challenges in terms of, physical adversity versus like the maybe mental, emotional, spiritual type of adversity or journey or awakening, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because Corey and I talked yesterday, and Corey was like, this guy has like 3 parts to his story. It's really not a second story. It's like he's into his third story at this point.
I think that's why the book surprises people, because it's not only a hockey book. That's kind of the first half, if you will, right? And again, fitting for for your guys' topic with the second story. And just in my practice that I teach and what I preach and live is just, okay, thinking about maybe what is this next movie of my life going to look like, and living that and honoring that. And I didn't know what that was going to look like. And that was a challenge to go find that.
Yeah. It's interesting the way you say that too. It almost makes me think that life's not really necessarily one movie. It's more of a trilogy.
Totally is. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, being younger, I didn't really kind of grasp that, right? Until you get thrown into the fire, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, we might as well start there. That's a great segue to, I guess we could start sort of at the beginning and maybe in your teenage years when the first big event happened in your life.
Yeah, so I was almost 20 years old playing junior hockey here in British Columbia. And I mean, I always tell people I never thought about pro hockey. It was never even on my radar, because I wasn't really that good. I mean, I was good. I played junior A hockey, but I snuck in as a fighter, and it was a bigger part of the game back then, and I was pretty decent at it, and that was my role. And my dream was the NCAA. That was my NHL. Again, never thought about pro hockey. And so I was chasing that dream. Just my first year in the league, I was just trying to stay in the lineup, really, right? And then after my second year, still hadn't talked to any NCAA scout at that point. And I guess to preface the accident, I mean, like a lot of us at that age, I was just thought I was invincible and untouchable, and always doing stupid shit for adrenaline and attention, feeding the young ego a bit, and living up to that fighter stereotype in a way. And I was kind of that, labeled the wild child from Revelstoke, again, just always doing stupid shit for a laugh, right? And on the night of this accident, I was basically like blowing up bottles full of gas in the fire. So not smart again, but kind of gave you the layout of the why behind that, and then the persona I was trying to live by. And yeah, one thing led to another. I actually had two big bottles of gas in my sweater pocket, and the bottoms had hit and broke. And so now I'm at this party. We're out camping in the bush, and I have a liter and a half of gas that is spilled on me. And we had been drinking. It was late into the night, and I knew there was a fire, and I know I have gas on myself, but I didn't. And I learned this later in the burn unit. I didn't respect the dangers of the vapors and everything surrounding that amount of gas. And I thought I kept a safe distance away from the fire. And I just remember at one point thinking just how much I reeked like gas. And I figured, well, I'll just throw my sweater in the fire because I'm not going to keep it. And I mean, if anything, I'll just, light that on fire kind of thing. And I went to throw it in the fire, and it was like, yeah, it was almost like a detonator cord to dynamite. I again thought I kept a safe distance away, and that flame just followed right from the fire to the ground, and then up I went. And unfortunately, the worst thing that I could have done was what I did is I just started running. I think that fight or flight response kicks in, and I just bolted. And guys are chasing me, and you can't put out a gas fire. You gotta smother it. So I'm sprinting, slapping, trying to slap the flames out. But what a gas fire would do is it kind of just jumps around. So it's kind of just jumping around my body, and the old stop, drop, and roll didn't work. And people ask me like, well, how long were you on fire for? And I couldn't really tell you. I didn't have the stopwatch running, obviously, but yeah, long enough that there was obviously significant damage. And even I remember at one point thinking, I've now been on fire for a while. This could end catastrophic, and that's what I'm thinking, because I just can't get this fire out. There's nothing left of my clothes. And finally, when I had that thought, that's when I finally got tackled from behind, from my teammates at this party that had been chasing me and yelling at me to stop fucking running around. And yeah, thankfully they tackled me, and And that's, I guess, really where the journey and the recovery kind of all began, was just I got situated on a cooler at this party, ass naked, you know, burnt. I'm bleeding. I'm filthy. I got like rocks embedded in my freshly burnt raw skin, and I'm just sitting there, not in any pain because you're in so much shock, right? And just it really hit me when I saw everyone's reactions. So there was probably say 30 or 40 people there, and yeah, people had different reactions. Some people were like crying. Some people had their mouth and nose covered because the smell of burnt flesh is like, man, it's something that stays etched in your memory forever. It really does. Um, I mean, some people were like whispering, and then it was the realization of like, this guy needs to get to a hospital, but we had no service. We were way out in the bush. And so thankfully, one of the guys on the team's girlfriend wasn't drinking. We piled in their car and had, about a 35-minute ride to the hospital. And then once that shock started wearing off, that was when the pain started sinking in. And man, it's hard to put it into words. I mean, I try to do it in the book to do it justice in terms of that level of pain, but it got to a point where I was like blacking out. It was so bad, and just getting slapped from behind in the back seat trying to keep me awake, and then ran into the emergency room. I mean, just to find humor in the story, which I can do now, I always tell people to think of, the emergency room in a hospital at, it was probably like 1 a.m. or something like that. And you got your token screaming baby. Maybe someone has like chest pains. A guy picked the wrong dude to fight at the bar and he needs to get some repairs. And then in comes this guy who's ass naked, runs through the doors, totally, again, bleeding, charred, and filthy dirty. And I can just imagine, what everyone's reaction was. It's probably like, yeah, he can go first. You don't have to take a number, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And they must have put me out. I don't remember anything after that except waking up in Vancouver the next day.
Yeah, that's wild. So they obviously in the book you talk about this, but they airlifted you to Vancouver, and you spent quite a bit of time down in Vancouver. Your family came to see you and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, my parents got that dreaded phone call at whatever time that night, and he's say your son's been in a serious accident. He's alive, but being a father now, I can't imagine getting that call. You think the worst, right? And so they're in Revelstoke, which is about just under 2 hours away. So yeah, again, I can't imagine what that drive was like. And talking to them later on, I don't think they fully grasped the severity of the situation until they actually saw me get stretchered out from Vernon to the ambulance to go into the helicopter there, because I was like fully wrapped head to toe like a mummy, right? And I think they realized like, holy shit, he's going to Vancouver. I don't see any skin. This doesn't look good, right? And then they had to drive to Vancouver, which is another 5 hours. And yeah, man, I can't imagine what they went through. I mean, I know now, and I think I've shed some years off their life. Well, my mom's life. My dad's no longer with us, but yeah, interesting times for sure.
Yeah. So we'll kind of start with, I'm going to go back to kind of what might seem like an insignificant little detail, but the cooler that they placed you on.
Yeah.
So you talk about this and how you actually placed your arm into the cooler during the ride to the hospital. Can you just talk about what happened with your arm, sort of what the limitations were and what the cooler actually ended up doing for you?
Yeah, well, I guess we could like probably fast forward even, it was probably a few days, maybe a week into my stay in the burn unit. And now we kind of knew the prognosis. I was going to be in there for most of the summer. I was going to make a full recovery, but it was going to be a long road. I was 40% second, third degree burns. And yeah, at the time they were talking about, I mean, the majority of the damage was my torso and my legs, and then my right arm and hand. And I remember that night, the first hint of pain I had was in my right arm and hand. The third degree burn areas you don't really feel because they're so deep. You burn through everything. The nerves are
Mhm.
gone, right? But the arm was, it was really starting to get to me. I mean, I think I described it more as like, it almost feels like someone's just kind of slowly carving into your skin with like a dull saw. And the
Oof.
guys at the party handed me a cooler, and I just plunged my arms in there because that was, again, the first thing that had really started to hurt in terms of pain. And I remember mentioning that to the doctor because at the time in the burn unit, he relayed this prognosis, and he just said, again, majority of damage to the torso, legs, and then that right arm and hand, they were talking about potentially even needing a bone graft. It was that bad.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
it just, the fact when we finally took the bandages off and how it looked, the doctor was like almost shocked in a way. And he's like, I don't know, how this looks so much better than I initially thought. And then I told him that I had my arm and hand in ice water for, again, 30 minutes. And he's like, that probably saved your right arm and hand, which is, yeah, I mean, I had a lot of things go my way in terms of just guys, helping me and looking out for me. Even something, I'm not a religious guy by any means, but a higher power just looking out for me because I mean, my face wasn't permanently scarred, and my skin grafts like literally stop at the top of my knee, which is very lucky because if you skin graft over a joint, that's a whole other ball game in terms of limited range of motion and those things. So yeah, the cooler was yeah, instrumental in terms of just really saving that right arm and hand. I mean, I have some scarring on my arm now, and my hand, it'll like change colors in the sun a little bit, but full use of it, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, it really is. It's really it's really something. Okay, so we'll talk about your time in the hospital, which for you was a pretty defining moment early in your life. So you
Hmm.
get to the hospital. Obviously, you mentioned that you're in the burn unit at that time. You've got family there. Can we talk a little bit about what sort of you mentioned the NCAA, but what ultimately was your dream in hockey at that point in your life when you had the burn accident?
Well, yeah, that dream got really just robbed and taken away from me. So this was my first real concrete memory, was the morning of day 3, I believe. Again, the first couple days, I don't really remember too much. You're just, I mean, I wasn't in a coma, but you're just hopped up on morphine, and you're kind of just in and out of sleep, trying to recover. But I had to get a debridement procedure every third day, which is, I describe it in the book, but it's basically torture where they like skin you alive. And they're just trying to keep those burns free from infection and clean, and ready to take that skin graft whenever the surgery was going to happen. And I was told anywhere from a couple, around 2 to 3 weeks kind of thing. And the doctor walked in the room after this procedure, and you're put under, thankfully. So I'm coming out of the anesthetic, and he comes in, and he relays this message of, you're lucky to be alive. This could have been a lot worse. Again, 40% second, third degree burns. You're going to make a full recovery. It's going to be a long road. You're going to be in here for a while, and we're going to just focus on rest and pain management. And I think my parents finally could take somewhat of a sigh of relief because, like, again, they didn't even know, like, is my kid going to make it at this point? I'm just wrapped like a mummy, and they don't know. We didn't really know how bad it was until those bandages come off and they could get a good look, right? I mean, we knew
Mhm.
it was obviously bad. I was in Vancouver, and at the time there were only 10 beds, I believe, in the burn unit. So the 10 worst burns in the province. And so, yeah, I think they took some solace in that fact. But as he was relaying this off, I remember all I could think about, aside from how much pain I was in, was I have training camp in 3.5 months, and I'm going into my last year of junior hockey eligibility. So now my last crack at the can to go get a scholarship. And I remember asking the doctor that. Again, I'm fully wrapped head to toe like a mummy. I'm sure no one's ever asked him that in the burn unit. And yeah, I remember he just kind of froze and looked at me like I was fucking crazy. And maybe I was, but that's the moment where I thought like, oh shit, this is over. And, he eventually laid that gavel down and said, these recoveries, they don't take months. Like it's going to be a couple years here in terms of start to finish full recovery. Uh, you may very well be in here by the start of training camp still. So he basically said, we'll get you in a pair of skates in a non-competitive environment years down the road when your recovery is complete, kind of thing. And so, yeah, that was it for me. I mean, I guess I listened to this doctor. He'd seen thousands of burn injuries before me, and yeah, it was trying to balance these different emotions of, uh, on one hand, I was down and depressed about what my life was supposed to look like now, not as a hockey player and as a burn survivor. But on the other hand, I was still very grateful that I was A, alive, and B, that I would make a full recovery and live a relatively normal life. I might have some gnarly scars to tell the story, but I could still go to school and whatever. I wasn't sure at that point, but it wasn't hockey. And so that was the first couple weeks was just, again, trying to balance those different emotions and trying to battle through the pain every second of every day. And then, I mean, we can go into the moment or the epiphany or like fork in the road light bulb moment, whatever you want to call it. When, again, 2 weeks into my stay, I got a call from my coach in Vernon, and my parents picked up the phone. I still couldn't grab anything because I'm just fully wrapped, and they stick the phone between my ear and my shoulder. And he said that he was talking with one of the coaches from Brown University, and that they were after a certain type of player, which you fit the bill. And I remember he said their exact words are, they want a guy to put the fear of God in the defenseman of the Ivy League. So I was pretty good at that. And so he's like, they want to talk to you, give them a call. I know you got the time. And that's what we did. My parents took down the number and we called this coach from Brown, and it honestly was left pretty open-ended. They just said, we're sorry to hear what happened. We wish you the best in recovery. And it almost felt like a formality where they just said, hopefully we'll get to see you play one day down the road. Just take care of yourself, knowing that wasn't really on the table anymore. And that was kind of it. And I remember my parents hung up the phone and we got really emotional together in that moment because, again, I had worked my whole life to just talk to one of these guys, and I had finally done it. And now look where I was and look what I had done to myself. And so sat with that for a little bit, and then the wheels started turning, and I just started asking questions. And I basically said, like, okay, they're telling me I can't play hockey in a few months. Why? And there was a really good long list of reasons why. Obviously, infection was probably number one. The burn injuries are very susceptible to infection, especially if you're talking about putting them under hockey gear that's never been washed ever. Right? I mean, I'm sure the kids wash their gear now, but yeah, we sure didn't. And the skin grafts were going to be too limiting, too painful, would take years to heal. I had to wear a full body suit for 2 years. I could no longer sweat now from those third degree areas because, again, you burn through everything, nerve glands, sweat glands. And we didn't know where that in the 40%, like how much of that was going to be skin grafts in third degree versus second degree. Like, was it going to be 20? Was it going to be 30, 40%? So if you're talking about almost half your body that's going to be skin graft and you can't cool down, and there's heart rate complications there, right? So the list just went on and on and on. And in my thankfully naive young head, I thought, basically what I'm hearing is you're telling me that it's going to hurt too much. And again, that was, I mean, I thought it can't be worse than what I've just been through these last couple weeks. Again, that was somewhat naive thinking, but I thought, well, the infection risk, I can deal with that if it comes my way. And yeah, that's when the light bulb went off, and I just said, I don't accept this, again, gavel that they've laid down on me on what my future is supposed to look like and what's possible. And so it was such a powerful moment because I made a choice and I made a promise to myself, and I really like reclaimed that dream back that I had given up in a short amount of time, that 2 weeks. But when I did reclaim it, I made the decision that I was willing to protect it with my life. And I truly made that choice that I was willing to die before giving up on that. And I don't, again, think there was a real risk of dying. I mean, the infection risk would have been or the infection would have been very serious if it did come. Thankfully, it never did. But yeah, I made not a truce, but I made good with the pain. And I just really, I think the realization I came to was the pain of me giving up and the pain that I would feel down the road would be far greater than any physical pain that I would endure. And so that's the mindset that I took from that day on. And that people always ask me, well, how did you discover visualization? And this is exactly how. Once I made that choice and that promise, I was bedridden. I couldn't move. So that was all I had. It was just me, the pain, and my thoughts every second of every day. And as soon as I started writing that script, and again, the practice that I teach now, thinking about it like a movie, which I didn't quite come to the realization in that moment that that's what I was doing. That came, at Brown later on. But yeah, what I was able to do was effectively like transport myself out of that shitty physical reality and into this other reality where there are no limitations and you get to be whoever you want and honor that and go chase that with intention and purpose. And it honestly was a superpower. It really was. And it's amazing how much the pain started to shift and change just by me reframing it. And that was a big part of the practice was nurturing that relationship because I had to. And visualizing healing at like a cellular level and imagine like those third degree burn areas shrinking, healing. I would imagine myself walking out of the hospital, going on this journey and this comeback of a lifetime, again, kind of defying the impossible because they were telling me that I wouldn't be able to do that. And again, looking back and you think about, I mean, you guys said you had movie or in the movie business, right? Experience. Like what makes a good movie? It's that comeback story or that long shot kind of theme, right? And I knew I certainly had that. And so I would just, visualize and imagine all those things. And then the season opener with the Vipers, and then the ending. And this is where I would really just obsess over this and really try and transport myself into that visualization almost to create like an experience, was just signing that commitment letter to Brown, knowing that, I had quote unquote defied the impossible. And yeah, man, I just got to go live in that reality as much as I could. And again, that doesn't mean that there weren't challenges and that the pain took over sometimes, sure. But yeah, it allowed me to get out of the hospital in 6 weeks, which was way sooner than they were telling me. Now
wow.
To say that I shouldn't have left. I remember, I got my skin graft surgery and now I have this mindset. So now I'm dead set on getting the hell out of there because I'm going to play hockey. And yeah, I got the surgery done. And then the big part of the stay is over at GF Strong in the rehab center, because that's a major part of the burn injuries. If you don't rehab them properly, then you're going to have issues down the road with those skin grafts. And I remember going through my first, week and a half or so of rehab. And the burn unit is, I always tell people it's one of the most amazing places in terms of just the people and the nurses and doctors and the people that you have in your corner of support. It truly is an amazing place, but it's also one of the most horrific places you can imagine, just in terms of the injuries. Like, man, there's just, it's like screaming all day long. These people are in just the worst pain you could ever think of all day long. And it's
Mhm.
just, and I just thought, like, I got to get the fuck out of here. I can't be in here anymore. And so I remember talking to my dad, and I was starting to feel good. I want my surgery. I had this mindset. I wasn't walking around yet, but I was wheeling myself into the rehab center. I was still all bandaged up and in pretty rough shape, so to speak. But I just remember asking him, like, why do I have to be in here? Can't we just go home? I'll rehab at home. And they had already said no, but I brought it up again because you have to complete the first phase of rehab there. And I just thought, like, can they just stop us? What if you just wheel me out of here? Why can't we do that? And so my dad went and talked to the nurses, and he just said, I don't think anything's going to stop my son from wheeling out of here. And they surprisingly agreed, and just they basically like made me go meet with the physio, got my, rehab program, and they just like really drove home, like, if you don't do this properly, you're going to have major issues. And again, I tried to relay like where I was at in terms of my journey and mindset. I'm like, if anyone is going to follow this through, it's me. I promise you that. And
Mhm.
yeah, they let us leave, I think reluctantly, but I mean, also, I guess they're freeing up a bed in the burn unit as well. So
I
yeah, I
guess so.
remember.
Yeah.
And then and this image I had of walking out of the hospital was, again, it was so like vivid and profound. And I remember my dad had a big medical bag full of all my gauzes and creams and supplies that I would need. And I'm getting wheeled out. And I remember just that vision popped into my head, and I yelled at him, stop, like right before the doors. And I, I I could kind of get up, but I was like an old man. So I just slowly got up and I walked out of the doors, waited till they closed, and then sat back in my wheelchair. So it wasn't quite how I had imagined it, but I still did it. And yeah, I mean, as you guys know, that's even really when the journey still was just starting. Was
Yeah.
that hell that summer was, and the next, I mean, really full year was.
Your story's just remarkable, and it keeps going from here. So we'll get into that shortly. But I just want to let you know, like we've interviewed quite a few people on this podcast that have gone through like tremendous amounts of adversity and have come through it miraculously, like you have.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm just wondering, from your perspective, do you think that's something that you that ability to get through it, do you think that's something you were born with? Is it something that you learned? Is it something that the adversity caused to happen? Like, where do you think that came from?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've been asked that before, and I often wonder, because I do think I have a little bit of a predisposed grit with just maybe my role in hockey, but also the way that my parents were and how we grew up, and very, hardworking. We didn't have a ton. My parents, worked a lot. We grew up pretty simple, but they were just, yeah, my dad always just preached like, have fun and work harder than anybody else. And I truly did that. And so, yeah, I sometimes wonder, like, because when I got that phone call, I didn't, I could have just thought, well, okay, great. I'll see how it goes. I'll see how this recovery goes. And I can tell you, nothing would I would have had a different life if that's the way I approached it. And so, I to answer your question, I think my parents were such a big influence, and maybe not me realizing it in that moment, but looking back, I think that certainly played a role. in that decision that I was able to make, because I was given the tools to again, like, kind of fight for your dreams and work harder than anyone else. And so, yeah, I think that certainly played a part in that decision. But I mean, I know I never make the NHL without having this experience in the burn unit. Um, so, and that's what I say to a lot of everyone that I work with. And this is true for life, right? Where we have to go through these hard times. And I don't advocate for people to, like, go play with fire, obviously. But I mean, the adversity is going to come in some form, right? And it's, how can we reframe that, and how can you use it as fuel to insert into your movie, if your life was a movie, right? How can you add that and have that live in there? And yeah, I think both of those things, that predisposition of grit and this awakening of what was truly possible and what we're truly capable of. But again, I got that through a very extreme adversity.
I'm going to talk about Corey and I for a sec, mostly myself. I'll be very narcissistic here. But so this show was actually born out of my own experience and Corey's own experience. I mentioned that to you before we jumped on. But
Mm-hmm.
I ended up in the hospital in 2021 for 6 weeks. Basically, I had an injury and I lost the ability to walk. It was actually a series of injuries. It really confused the doctors, but I ended up in a hospital for 6 weeks. It was during the height of COVID, so I was away from family, and it was
Oh
not a
yeah.
very fun experience. But while I was in the hospital, it was such a weird thing that happened to me while I was in there. And I think something probably similar happened to you. But when I got into the hospital, I had this mentality. I was very negative. I was like, why is this happening to me? Like, why am I
Yeah.
here? I'm supposed to be with my family. Like, I can't see anybody. And probably about halfway into it, I started regularly talking to Corey on the phone. I would call him every day because I had no one to talk to.
Mm-hmm.
I would call him every day. And it started as I started to do that and talk about what I was going through. Like, Corey would have these kind of positive vibes that he would give me and it would cheer me up. And we got to a point from where I was like, why is this happening to me, to like, what's the opportunity here, or like, what can I do to get make my situation better, and how can I come out of this thing stronger and better, and what can I do to use this horrible experience to make myself better, make my life better. And that's really what actually spawned this show. It took us like 2 years from there to actually start doing it, but I don't know if that was
Yeah.
us being lazy or just being figuring it out. But there was this real epiphany that I had, which is
Mm-hmm.
what made your book so relatable. Obviously, my injuries weren't nearly as horrific as yours, but as I was coming out of it, and as we've gotten into our life and actually building this thing, one of the things that I've sort of realized is that I didn't want to let the adversity I was going through define me, but I knew how I responded to it was going to define me. And with
Totally.
you,
Yeah.
obviously, like that's part of what visualization is, at least. And I'm not really familiar with it, but can you just talk a little bit about visualization, what it actually is for people who don't know?
Yeah. So basically, the way I describe it is, we all have like a big screen TV at the back of our mind, right? Something's being projected onto that at all times. And so I like to tell people, imagine, and we're not wired to project good, empowering things on the back of that, right? That's just unfortunately not the way we're wired. So I'd like to tell people, think of visualization as taking the remote and changing the channel on what you're projecting back there. And the cool thing is that our brain doesn't actually know the difference between physically experiencing something and mentally experiencing it. Now, there's a small caveat there, I guess, where in order to do that effectively, like, we know that simply thinking positive it's not quite enough. And so really where the magic happens and you can start to tap into that subconscious is if you can create an experience in that visualization. And how do you create an experience? You have to have emotion tied to that, right? And as soon as you do that, now your brain doesn't know the difference. So this is very true in rehearsal imagery, which is one of the types of visualization. And for my athletes, that's where it's like just the successful mental execution of a skill in your sport, right? And there's been many studies on these with athletes, like pianists and, musicians, and just basically rehearsing and going through the skills in your mind, right? So that's effective because your brain doesn't know the difference. So that's setting yourself up. Your confidence is going to be higher. You're more preparation, right? And you're going to perform better. The other type of visualization is like the belief, the manifestation imagery, and that's really where thinking about it like a movie comes into play in the cinematic piece, where if I have this vision and this ending of my movie and what I want that to look like, and really immersing myself in that, and if my brain doesn't know the difference, I mean, this is really what manifestation is, you know, at a whole, is just the reason you're manifesting that is because your brain thinks that that moment has already happened, right? So now you're slowly just becoming that. Your energy starts to change, right? And I think this is twofold. So number one, you can really cultivate that untouchable sense of belief and trust in yourself if when you have that practice and you have it effectively, because again, your brain thinks like, hey, I'm already living as that person now in the present physical world, right? But the other piece of is, and again, I say this to all my clients, is that obviously it's not like I'm going to sit on my ass and watch Netflix and scroll through social media and visualize my movie and it's just going to magically come true, obviously, right? And so that's a big piece of it, is you come out of this practice and yes, your brain thinks like that has happened, but you also have the reality, or you know the realization that I'm here in this room, or I'm outside doing this practice, or I'm in my room and I'm not there. And so that's the other piece of it. It just really drives the obsession and the daily habits and choices, because if that vision is strong and powerful enough, then that difficult choice to put in the work to do shit that no one else is doing, that becomes pretty damn easy, because you're like, man, I really like that person. I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that that happens, right? And so I think it's kind of twofold there, why it's so powerful.
Yeah, I've never formally like worked with visualization or anything like that, but I know like coming out of the hospital, I did have this vision for what I was going to turn my life into, and I'm on that path. And you mentioned
Yeah,
like superhuman like powers or superhero powers. That is a lot of the days what it feels like. Like there are days where I'm like, I can't believe like I'm living the life I'm living and doing what I'm doing. It's unbelievable. I never thought I had it in me, like the work ethic and things like that. But I kind of see myself as like I am. That's the person I am. I'm just on the
mm,
journey to become it. Like I'm kind of
yeah.
on the rise to do it. And adversity was a big part of it for me. I know, obviously, for you too.
Do you ever talk to people about, like, is there a way to gain that kind of visualization of yourself without having to, light yourself on fire or have some major catastrophe happen, end up in the hospital like Josh did?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the reality is, I mean, and a lot of people that I work with haven't had that yet, right? And so a lot of it is just, again, thinking about this movie and immersing yourself in that movie. And again, having that ending of the movie and that end vision. And that's going to push you into adversity regardless. Maybe not to the extent we're talking about, but it's going to, because you're going to have to go get uncomfortable. If I'm talking with my athletes, like, if you have like a dream to be an Olympic gold medalist, like the amount of pain and sacrifice and uncomfortableness that you're going to feel is going to be like immense, right? So it's more just like jumping into the quote unquote fire and just being okay with adversity, and really the mindset of just like, I don't know where this journey is going to lead me. It's going to go down a lot of different paths. That's the ending. And again, no matter what comes my way, no matter what adversity I go through, whether it be injuries, in my personal life and family, like life can get hard sometimes, right? And it's just about the recognition of honoring that vision in that movie, by attacking every day and welcoming the adversity, right? And so it's just really kind of just reframing the relationship with adversity, because a lot of people don't have a good relationship with that, right? We're just wired to like go to the victim mentality, and I certainly did that initially in the burn unit, right? And so just I think just really preaching the realization that the adversity is there to help you. You won't know it in the moment, but if you have that vision and you're honoring that movie, then nothing can stop you. It really can.
This is sort of on topic, but it's maybe a bit more abstract. So I used to do play-by-play for Tier 2 junior hockey, which I know
Oh
you're
yeah,
familiar with, in Ontario.
yeah.
But years ago, I was covering this team, and they actually 4 members of the team had a really bad car accident in which 2 of them were killed.
Oh no.
The first game afterwards, I said on the air that, so it was like in between periods or what have you, and I was discussing it, and I said on the air that every boy goes through this period of recklessness in their life, and for some
Yeah,
it's a couple years, for some it's like 10 years, but every boy goes through it, and on the other side of it they become a man if they get to the other side of it. And some people were
right.
kind of pissy about it, but to me I lived it, so I know that it's true. So for
Yeah,
you, obviously, you're careless. I mean, you survived it, obviously. But what
yeah.
would you say, like, to a boy who is living through that period of recklessness? Like, if you could go back and talk to yourself, what would you say?
That's such an interesting question, because I mean, people have asked me that, like, if you could do it all over again, would you have gone through that accident and that injury? And it's hard for me to say no, because it gave me so much. And again, I knew I would have never made the NHL without going through that moment and that realization of like what I'm truly capable of in those moments. Um, so that's a hard one. I do think that, yeah, you can be smarter with it for sure. But I don't know if you fully remove just the young boy in everyone, right? Uh, I mean, the issue is like it could have been a lot worse.
Mm,
And whether it be driving, you know, drunk, which obviously hopefully the kids aren't doing now, but I mean, I've made that mistake as a young teenager before, and again, you think you're invincible until something catastrophic happens, right? So I think we can certainly still be smarter about it, but I do think, like you said, I think boys they go through that, uh, and with that, I like the way I relate it, especially in the burn unit and other people's experiences, is in those moments if, of adversity, you're going to have different doors, right? So you're going to have door number one is just going to be kind of the victim mentality and poor me, and I'm just going to get through this, and just let it consume me, and I'm just going to succumb basically. And then door two is, no, I'm going to go overcome this, but maybe I don't have the belief truly deep down that I can do it. And then door three, which is the one I took, was, now I'm going to go do this, and I have the belief to go do it, and I'm going to chase it, and I'm going to protect it with my life, kind of thing. And I think, like you said, that's where I became a man. Now, not fully, like I still was learning, obviously, but that was the start of it for sure.
You had talked about early on in your hockey career having limited beliefs, right? You
Yeah.
didn't think you're going to make it to the NHL, but I would say prior to the accident, you were starting to overcome those a little bit because you still had hope. It was your last year of getting noticed and all that kind of stuff you were talking about. Um, so do you feel like you were getting past some of those limiting beliefs prior to the accident, or do you think it was the accident that was the catalyst?
No, I think the accident was the catalyst, because I don't really think I was overcoming any of that, because I still never even thought I could play pro hockey,
Okay.
right? I think, yeah, I mean, I would say almost every kid that plays hockey has the dream of the NHL at some point in their life, right? I know my son,
Mhm.
like he certainly does. And I think that the protection of those limiting beliefs started to grow their roots around, probably 12, 13 years old. Because I played house hockey in Revelstoke, and I got cut from select teams, and I was above average in Revelstoke, but I wasn't that good, and I never had an opportunity to go play major junior hockey. So in again my young head, I just thought, well, the writing's on the wall, and then again, you're protecting those limiting beliefs, and so I gave up that dream, which was a mistake. But again, going through the burn unit, I was able to not reclaim the NHL dream, because that was never a dream until, I shouldn't say never, only until when I was 24 years at Brown, which we can get into that kind of next. I guess that's the second story within the first story. Um, but yeah, just really reclaiming the NCAA dream in the burn unit was such a powerful moment for me.
So you go to Brown, obviously. We can talk a little bit about your career there, but I really want to ask, and I know the answer to this, but I think the audience should hear it. So what were the moments that kind of led you to believe that, holy shit, I have a shot at actually getting to the NHL or playing pro hockey?
It wasn't even a realization of, like, I necessarily have a shot. And I'll try and explain that, but it was just, again, the choice I made to just do it. I didn't care if, like, there was a chance. In my head, I was just going to go do it. Now that didn't come until 24 years old. So I went to Brown. Uh, my I mean, we skipped over like the next 6 months of that recovery, which was absolute hell. Like, I shouldn't have been playing hockey, but again, that vision, and I just again made the choice to honor that, and I was going to die trying. And I actually, when I committed to Brown, I stopped playing hockey the next day, because I was meeting with the coaches and the doctors, and like I could barely walk still, and I'm trying to play like junior hockey. I was in terrible shape in terms of just the pain, and the skin grafts were still fresh. And so if you look on the stats, I only played 20, I think maybe 25 games that last year of junior hockey, because uh, I mean, the players and the coaches are like, dude, like, you've done it now. I think you can go back and heal and get better, because I wasn't even close yet.
Mhm.
So that took the doctors were right. It took about 2 years to fully feel somewhat like my pre-burn self. So my freshman year at Brown, I went through, still had a lot of complications. I was still wearing my full body suit. But I was playing like fourth line, was healthy scratch some games. And then sophomore and junior year, I felt pretty good. Now I was still like bottom six. Again, never thought about pro hockey. Um, and I remember, again, this moment changed when, after my junior year, one of the coaches came up to me and he asked me that question. He's like, "Hey, you ever thought about playing pro hockey?" And I'm 24 years old now. So, most guys at that age have an idea like where they're headed in terms of that. So I remember laughing in his face, and I was just like, I've never even talked to a scout. I don't have an agent. No offense, I play on the bottom six on one of the worst teams in the country. Like, we weren't very good. And I'm like, I've literally never thought about it. And he just, yeah, he sat me down and said, "I've never seen anyone hit the way you can hit. You can skate. I know you can fight from your junior days." He's like, "I really think if you worked on your game and worked on the skill, that you could have a solid 5, 10 year career in the American League." And for the listeners that don't know, or maybe Corey, uh, the
For
the
Corey.
A the
Please explain.
AHL, which is the league right below the NHL. So it's like the feeder league, the first feeder league to the NHL. And then he continued and said, "And you never know, like, maybe you get a shot one day in the NHL." And I didn't really know what to say other than thank you in the moment. And I went home that night and just thought more about what he said, and that's when everything just flipped again, and that light bulb went off. And I kind of, I forgave myself pretty quickly, but I was like, shit, like, I may have been leaving a little bit on the table here these last 3 years at Brown, because once I got there, I totally abandoned that visualization practice, because remember, that was it. Like, that was the ultimate peak in my limiting head, right? So I didn't have the wherewithal to think like, again, write a new movie. Like, what else? If I could do that, what else could I do? And so I had this realization, and I'm like, I just kept asking myself, like, I could play in the NHL, like a small kid from Revelstoke, never thought about pro hockey, went through this burn injury. Like, that would be pretty damn sweet. Get paid to play this game that I love to play. And yeah, I made that choice, and I just said, fuck it, let's do it. I'm going to play in the NHL. And as soon as I made that choice, similar to I made in the burn unit, and then so this is going back now, I reclaimed that dream as a young kid now, right? And fast forward when I was 24 years old, and it was that willingness to protect it with my life. Now, granted, at that point, I wasn't going through any like major injury or anything, but that was the mindset going into it. And so when I made that decision, I had to go back to what got me out of that burn unit, because I knew that if I could overcome that, like, I could play in the NHL. That seems easier in my head than what I had done in the burn unit. I was told that it wasn't even possible, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when I had the realization is this visualization practice that had given me so much, and the mistake I made of just abandoning that. And so I went to work on this new mind movie, and I lived that every day. Um, and I went to work on directing what that looked like. And again, the amount of belief and trust that started to instill in me, but really just drove the obsession. Like, I literally became a machine and became so obsessed with that dream that, I mean, I called my parents the next day. I said, I'm not moving home. I'm going to stay out here. And I just lived at the rink. Like, I worked out 3 times a day. I was on the ice whenever I could. I slept at the rink sometimes. Like, I was just obsessed. And it's just there's all these books I've read too on not only visualization, but uh, what's the 10,000 hour rule book by Outliers. And I
Oh,
just
okay.
thought that would, and not that, I mean, the 10,000 hour thing, we could debate that all day long, but I thought it was very interesting because, I had slowly got up to that at 24 years old. I mean, that summer I would have surpassed it, you know, because of this obsession. And I was shot out of a cannon that senior year. Um, I mean, I had more points that last year than my first 3 years combined. And so I was still playing my role. And I packed on again. I was in the gym all the time, and I think I was probably 215 at the time, and 20, almost 25 years old, playing against these young 18-year-olds. And let's just say there were some injuries, unfortunately, for those guys, because I was just a wrecking ball. And now adding that offensive piece to the game, that's a pretty rare package. So yeah, I went within 6 months. I went from no one in the NHL knowing who I was to everyone knowing who I was, and I mean, it literally came out of nowhere. Um, and then I ended up signing with the Canucks, which it's so cool because I signed with them. I remember, and I could have signed anywhere. I think I had 8 contract offers. Like, I could have signed in New York. Like, it literally could have been anywhere else. And
Wow.
just being like the Canucks of all the teams, like my home province team I grew up cheering for. And then I actually moved to Vancouver that summer to train with some of the guys. And I remember I rented a place like 2 or 3 blocks away from VGH, and I would go back to the burn unit, visit some of the people in there, and just to provide support, and kind of give back. But I would also just, it's funny, I would like, it's like the deja vu moment. I would just walk in and out of those doors to that hospital like I had done in that wheelchair. And I just had this crazy realization, mostly the first time I did it, but even, all those times after, when I'd go a few times a week. And I just thought, like, 5 years prior to that, I was in that burn unit without an inkling of a thought of pro hockey. and told I would never even play hockey and I'd never be able to go play in the NCAA in Vancouver. And now 5 years later, I'm on the Vancouver Canucks. And I just thought, I couldn't help but think, like, had I been manifesting this my whole life and I didn't even realize it, you know?
Yeah.
It was such a crazy realization for me. And it was funny, my parents didn't actually believe me when I signed, because I never told anyone about this like plan I had. I mean, my teammates knew that I was going to sign an NHL deal, but that was kind of it. My parents knew I was having a good year, and they knew that I was, maybe going to give the pro hockey thing a shot for a year or two to kind of check it off and say I did it. Like, that's what they thought. And so I called them the day after I signed, and I said, remember how I told you I'd been talking with a few pro scouts? And they said, oh yeah, yeah. And I said, well, by pro I meant the NHL. And I remember there was a stretch of silence over the phone, and my dad finally chimed in, and he's like, "Fuck off! What do you really want to tell us? Like, I know you're screwing with us." And yeah, anyways, we kept chatting, and finally they clued in. But it was funny because they just didn't believe me.
Wow.
That's wild. It's funny how life can go full circle in so many different ways. To end up back in
Yeah,
Vancouver, it's pretty
I know.
insane. Yeah, wild.
Yeah,
Goals are such a wild thing. Like, having goals, it's funny to see how, like, we have this idea of like where we're gonna go, and it always seems such a final thing, and then you get there and you kind of live in that for a little bit, and then it's sort of on to the next one. And sometimes people forget, like, to just enjoy the journey to actually get to that goal.
yeah,
And one thing I've noticed, and I'm sure you probably noticed this about yourself too, is that the more I get older and go through life, we're pretty close to the same age. I think you're like 12 days older than me.
oh, yeah,
I find that I start looking back and I'm like, holy shit, like, looking back like 3-4 years ago, I'm like, that was like the biggest goal in my life. And then I accomplished it, and I kind of just moved past it and never really gave it a whole lot of thought. For me, at least, and I don't know if this is true for you, but the reason I do that is because I just enjoy the journey so much. And then when I get to the goal, it's
hmm
like, I need another journey, and I'm excited to start that new journey. And so I'm able to like hit goals and kind of just move on from them because it was all about the journey. Do you find that you're
yeah,
similar in that way? Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I think that's such a big piece of it, is just knowing that the journey is going to be full of ups and downs, and that the ending is just going to be that much sweeter if you have to go through those hard times in order to get there, right? I think the one thing that I do, and that I get my all my clients that I work with to do, is really actually reframe the relationship with goals. Um, I think goals are, and this is my view on it, is they're just a little bit, I think, hokey in a way, and for you and other people that might not be the case, but I just think most people, they set a goal, but really it lives as like a hope and a wish, and it just generally goes to die in the dumpster full of everyone else's goals, because and again, this might not be true for everyone, but I know it is true for a lot of people, where it's like, yeah, you have this huge goal, but are you truly like willing and doing what needs to be done in order, in terms of like sacrifice and obsession to go achieve that goal? Most people, that's not the case,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so the way I approach it is more with the cinematic mind mapping, living this movie is, and I tell my clients to think about more, try and create a way of life and a way of being versus just like a goal. I think goals can be effective in like a short term kind of maybe target, or something like that. But when you create a state of being and a way of life, um, that's much more powerful. And you're able to enjoy the journey in doing that, because that's just you're creating like a blueprint for who you are and who you're going to be every single day on the way to that vision. And I just, again, it's no longer like a hope and a wish, it's just somewhere that you're going. I
Yeah.
think that just, it lives in the mind differently. um and and
I can
and
see
maybe
that.
even and maybe even for you, Josh, like, it's just the relationship. So if you're saying goal, you already, it sounds like, have that. right? In terms of you're just creating a way of life and a state of being. But a lot of people, they don't have that, and they're not able to do that with just writing down a goal and thinking positive, but still faltering to like the victim mindset and like this is too hard, and the limiting beliefs come in, and you're like, that negative self-talk starts, and you're like, I'm probably not good enough, like I got to get so lucky, blah blah blah, and then it starts spiraling, and then it still goes to live as like the hope and the wish kind of thing, you know.
Yeah, for sure. When we started this show, we had goals. We had like a 1 year, a 5 year, and a 10 year goal for this thing. And as we started to do it and started to like network and make connections, we realized like it dragged us into so many avenues that we never expected. And we got into so many things. We're like, holy, like could have never saw that coming. And it
Yeah.
made me really change my relationship with long-term goals. And now I actually get irritated when people ask me like, what's your 10 year or 20 year goal? Because I don't know what next week is going to throw at me. And I've been caught by surprise on so many things. I'm like, I can't predict that. So I've really tried to fixate on, I still like goals, but they're more short term. It's like, let's try to do this by the end of the month. Let's try to do,
Right.
try to do those things. And it's more of like, I try to keep it things that are in my own control because I can't control what anybody else does. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I've gotten to a place now where, and I think Corey's getting there too, where I try not to need other people to reach my own goals. And I really
Hmm.
don't need other people. At least my professional goals, like my personal goals with my family and stuff. Like I need
Yeah.
my wife, I need my kids, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I find that as I've gotten a little bit older, definitely my relationship with goals has changed as I've moved past a lot of them. And yeah, so I totally agree with what you're saying. And it's going to be a reframe in my own mind to completely get past it.
I think, yeah, and goals are sometimes tricky because there's a timeline associated with them. Whereas if you create that way of just, again, way of life, state of being, time, time's irrelevant because it's just somewhere that you're going. And I say this to my athletes, especially in the hockey world, like the younger kids that I work with, and even college players, it's like this might take you a long time, right? And they all want to get there like yesterday. And it's more, a lot of it is just like, and this is true in any, you know, sport or profession, is like how long can you stay in the fight and honor that vision, because it might take you some time, and that's perfectly okay. It'll be that much sweeter when you get there, right?
Yeah, the time thing is I think a real issue for people. I'll use like weight loss as an example, but I know so many people are like, I want to lose 10 pounds by like, in 3 months or
Yeah.
what have you.
Yeah.
And then they lose like 8 and they feel like a failure. But it's like, if you just doubled it, made it 20 pounds and stretched out your timeline to like a year, you're probably going to hit it. Like it's
Right.
just time is such a thing. It's such an abstract thing. And we really limit ourselves when we do put time. And yeah, you can make
Yeah,
yourself a
absolutely.
failure or a success just changing your timeline on something. And a lot of times it is your timeline that you have control of.
If you really focused and cultivated this state of being and this way of life, you are guaranteed to lose a ton of weight. Guaranteed.
Right.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
It just
Yeah.
it's, I mean, it's not rocket science. We all know that, but it's such a difficult thing for people to achieve because you get on the bandwagon and then you fall off because it's this short term, time attached, outcome, and you're it's like outcome based versus like create a way of life and now enjoy the process and go on the journey. And again,
Yeah.
it sounds like very simple, uh, but again, we are hardwired to have these thoughts. Well, I shouldn't say hardwired, but that's what people think. We can change that, but it takes work, and it takes time and practice to cultivate that. But everyone can do that.
I got a question for you. Which accomplishment meant more to you, getting to the NCAA or getting to the NHL?
Oh, I don't know if anyone's asked me that before. That's a good question. I think, I mean, probably the NHL in terms of just, yeah, just the full circle, like manifestation and realization of like maybe I was like put on this earth to go do that, but I didn't know it. And once I had gotten there, it's like, no, dummy, you like had been manifesting this your whole life. You just didn't realize it, kind of thing. I think in terms of uh, like the pride and that I felt in myself and what I was truly capable of, that would have definitely been the NCAA, and again, like overcoming the quote unquote impossible. So I don't know if that's a definitive answer, but I think they meant different things.
I had a feeling you were going to say that. Yeah.
I mean, if you were to like gun to my head, I probably would just say the NHL, just because of that how I explained it.
That's actually surprising to me. I thought you were going to go NCAA because of all the adversity you overcame in that short period of time.
Yeah,
Nostalgia too.
but I think in where I am at the NHL, like that was still like the catapult that got me there. So it still lives in that in my
Fair
mind,
enough.
but
Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah.
People who watch this are probably going to hate me for this, but we're going to kind of gloss over much of your NHL career, if that's cool with you, towards the end of your NHL career.
yeah, no, good.
Yeah, because I think that's where it gets really, really interesting in your story. So obviously you played in the NHL 5 seasons. You started with the Vancouver Canucks. You got picked up on waivers by the Washington Capitals,
Yeah.
which for Corey, that basically means the Canucks put him out to any team in the league and you could pick him up off the waiver wire. And that's what
Gotcha.
the Washington Capitals did. So we'll talk about the end of your career, which was obviously a tough thing to deal with, if you don't mind.
Yeah, totally. So I kind of bounced around, went to Washington, and had this neck injury. So I got hit from behind, unfortunately by a big D man, and went in. I'm lucky again that I didn't break my neck, but I basically blew up that disc and was having all these issues after that. I never actually got feeling back in my right thumb and these two fingers until I had the surgery successfully. And so that surgery happened in probably, when was that? It was like, that was 10 years ago now, but it happened, I think, in May. And then it's like a 6 to 8 month recovery, which is the spinal fusion, which is a pretty crazy surgery. So now the guys are getting the disc replacements, which in hindsight would have been a lot better option because there's a lot of complications with the fusion. But it is what it is at this point. And yeah, it was such an interesting injury because I got cleared around Christmas, and I was in the last year of my contract, and there was a few months left in the season, and I knew, especially with the role I played, that if I didn't play, like, it was over, because no one's going to give me another contract if I just missed a whole season because of injury, right? You're pretty disposable in the fourth line role. There's a lot of younger, cheap options that'll come up and play that role, healthy options. So I knew the writing was on the wall, and it was hard because deep down I knew that I wasn't ready to play, especially the role, like, just with the symptoms I was still having. And now it's like, you got to go fight this guy 6'4", 250, like, good luck. I'm like, I'm just thinking, like, am I going to break my neck? It still doesn't feel very good. Now I almost in a way lied and said it felt fine because I just knew that if I didn't play it, it was over. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it got to a point where, like, I could barely get out of bed. I wasn't really in the team's plans. Like, they were doing pretty well, and I missed the whole season, so I don't blame them. And then ended up getting sent down to the minors at the end of that year. And yeah, just again, I could barely get out of bed. My neck was killing me, and I thought, and I was starting to think about having a family with my wife at the time, now ex-wife, and I was like, fuck, am I going to be like crippled, and I want to be able to play with my kids, and I don't want to like break my neck. So there was a major risk of adjacent herniation when you have the fusion there, because there's a lot, limited range of motion. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to go see the surgeon and just see what he says, just to make sure that I don't like permanently damage myself here. And yeah, unfortunately, I went there and he said, you can't be playing hockey the way you are now. I'm not saying you can't down the road, but right now it's definitely not safe. Um, Again, you don't want to have a double fusion, because now you're talking about, like, that's life changing. And yeah, it was such a hard time because I ultimately made the decision to retire in that moment, or just again, I knew I wasn't going to get a contract. I was like, well, maybe I can go overseas and play for a couple years. But the reason it was so interesting is because and that's the reason I pushed through this injury, is because I still had that mindset like I did in the burn unit, and that I could overcome anything. And that, I went back to the visualization and tried to help myself in terms of healing with that and create that state of being. But the difference was with that burn injury, once that infection risk passed, and I was willing to accept that risk, like I couldn't make my burns any worse. It was more just, can you deal with this level of pain and adversity? And the difference with the neck was that there was a very real risk of making that much worse. And so it was hard for me to, in a way, succumb to that, right? Because I still had that mindset. But again, different time in my life now. If I was 20, maybe it would have been different. But at the time, it was like, well, again, I'm starting to think about having a family here, and I don't want to be crippled and not be able to like pick my kids up. And so that's sort of, that's how it ended. Um, but it was hard because, then life really hit me, right? And it just all kind of came in waves, where I was dealing with like still chronic pain and stiffness from this neck injury. And that loss of identity was a real struggle. And I had that briefly in the burn unit, but now it was going to be for real, where, I didn't get to go out on my own terms, and it just ended like that kind of overnight. And yeah, just thinking about like, what the hell am I going to do with the rest of my life now? Like, this is all I know. And I had an Ivy League degree, and I still struggled with it. Like, there's guys that, a lot of guys I know really struggle with that loss of identity. And I had stuff to fall back on, but I was still just lost, not knowing what the hell I was going to do. And then, I had, as you guys know through the book, like a lot of trauma surrounding like childbirth, going through a divorce eventually. My dad was sick. I eventually worked in wealth management, which was bad timing with all this other stuff going on. But, I just got pulled down to rock bottom and was drinking too much, and I was just not in a good place. And I remember even sitting in my little office in Vernon at this wealth management job and thinking like, how the fuck did I get here? Like 2 years ago, I was playing in the NHL. Like life was great, not a care in the world. I mean, I had like some anxieties, like a lot of fighters, in terms of just like the build up to the fights kind of thing. But life was pretty good. And then I just, yeah, again, thought like, this isn't how it was supposed to go. Like, how did I get here? And yeah, I was in a dark place, not a good spot. And I remember thinking like, maybe I should go talk to someone. And when ended up going to see this counselor, and honestly, it was such an important time, and I'm glad I did. And it wasn't an easy thing for me to do because, as men, and this is a whole other topic, I guess, but especially a man in hockey, is we weren't taught to be like vulnerable and show weakness. And that's just the era that I grew up in, and it's getting better, right? But I think it still exists to some degree. But in those meetings with the counselor, we came to this important realization where like mental health encompasses many different things, right? There's a physical piece, there's a mental, spiritual, emotional piece. And I realized that I was really good at overcoming physical adversity, right? As you know, through the burn injury and my role in hockey, like if you put a wall in front of me and there's something I want on the other side of that wall, like I'll break through that all day long to get what I want. Like it doesn't matter how thick or how big it is, I'll go through it. But life after hockey hit me with like the emotional, spiritual type of adversity, and I just realized that like inside I was just a young, immature little boy, and I didn't know how to deal with that. Like I couldn't physically fight those demons, right? And so that was an important realization. And actually the rock bottom moment I had was, again, I was pretty freshly split with my ex. I was living in this little condo building, and I had my oldest son, he would have been like 2.5, 3 at the time. And I was like hungover from the night before and just feeling like shit. And I remember he came over and I like put on a show for him because I was like, I'm not feeling good, buddy. I'm just gonna go catch a nap. And it, yeah, I got emotional because I went in the room and I'm like, and my dad was such an amazing man and important. You know, he was almost more like a brother than a father, but we were so close. And I just remember walking into the room, close the door, and I'm like, "What the fuck are you doing? You said you would never be that guy." And so, yeah, I remember I made that again. It kind of all starts with the choice. I just made the choice, and I said, "Okay, it's time to go get some help and go talk to someone." And I turned off the TV. We went outside for a bike ride, and that was really the start, I guess, of the second story. You could say it was that moment. And yeah, just kind of rewriting the story. And in that, when I talked to the counselor, I had mentioned, you know, the experience I had had with the visualization and living this movie. And it's funny because I've made this mistake multiple times in my life of only using it for getting something that I want. And then as soon as I get it, I abandon it. And so I made that mistake again after I retired. And again, adversity has a way of pulling you into that victim mindset. And even with all the things that I've been through with the burn injury, I still fell into that trap, right? Like, why is this happening to me? This isn't fair, blah, blah, blah. You get pulled down it. And as soon as I went to work on like a new movie, and the realization is that, okay, like that Aaron Volpatti, he doesn't exist anymore. I can't play hockey anymore. But why isn't there, and this is the, you know, the protection of the limiting beliefs. And for me, the belief that like maybe there was something bigger and better even from that out there. Right. And I didn't have that belief. And as soon as I went to work on this new mind movie and I started living that and honoring that and weaving in those like emotional and spiritual pieces into that, my life just, it started changing very, very quickly, as you know, from reading the book. And yeah, it's just so crazy how it's all kind of played out. And again, like I'm not where I am today without any of that adversity and the hell that some of that felt like, right? And so now I'm very thankful for those times, and now I don't make that same mistake anymore, and I practice this practice that I teach, and I honor that. And again, that doesn't mean that life's not going to get hard, but I know that I always get to go back to those moments, and it helps me reframe any type of adversity in the future that comes my way. And again, it's more just about enjoying being present, enjoying the journey, which means there'll be good and there'll be bad times, right? You're just more at peace with it and just being present, right?
Yeah.
I'd say that that part of your story is actually, and I haven't actually got to that in the book, so I'm looking forward to that. I would say that's more closely tied with my second story, just because I got to like a really dark place. I was actually in a similar position, actually in wealth management.
Oh yeah,
which is strange.
are you in
But
it now, or you were in it?
No, I own a business now. I do video production, so I'm
Oh, okay.
closer to what Josh and I went to school for, film production. So
Right.
but no, I left that. But I had gotten into a very dark place too, and you know, was sort of ignoring my family and different things like that. Got very depressed,
Yep.
and I just think like men, I think we struggle a little bit more with that identity piece that we really identify with what we do.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's amplified for people in sports. So.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of pro athletes, if not all, go through that at some point. Because I think you're right. I think we identify with, and I think we're builders. We want to like create, and but through that we identify with, you know, who is the creator, who's the builder, and you want to build a life and protect it, right? But if that identity gets robbed, then it gets tricky for sure.
You had that moment where you're talking about with your son, and it kind of started you on this journey. So let's talk a little bit about where your journey has taken you today, obviously. So you mentioned you talked a few times about clients and things like that. So that moment you went on the bike ride with your son, what did that lead to for you?
Well, I didn't know, right? But it was at that time, it was more just, again, I didn't know, and that was the tricky part of just writing this new movie, is I didn't exactly know in terms of like professional wise, like what would that look like in terms of career. I knew there was something out there. It was a lot of it was more surrounding like the family, because that was really hard for me, the way I grew up and how close our family was, and having gone through that divorce, like that was a big blow to my ego a little bit too. But just, even you talk about identity, and I felt like a failure in going through that. Now I look back, and I'm thankful for that, and I have a great relationship with my ex, and I'm with the right woman now, and it was all, again, all just part of the journey, and that's part of the story, and I'm thankful for everything. But that was hard to deal with. Um, but on that bike ride, again, it was just the realization of like, I'm on this journey, and I know now, I know I'm going to be okay, and I'm going to go somewhere that's even better, and push through these times again, just like I had done in different times in my life. But a lot of it was just, visualizing, and seeing like that family and the closeness, and just like I had it growing up. Um, Now, through that, I started just kicking open doors, because I didn't know what I would have wanted to do still. I was okay with that now. Before that, I wasn't okay with it, right? It was causing me a lot of, anxiety, and just, again, the lack of identity. But I mean, yeah, I almost started a business. I almost bought a local business. Thank God that didn't happen, because COVID hit shortly after that. Uh, Ended up doing an Ironman triathlon to raise money for ALS, which my dad had, which was it was kind of twofold. It was a nice distraction for me in just having purpose in something, and raising money for a good cause. But that ended, and then again, I almost had opportunities with these businesses. I looked into a lot of different things in terms of starting one, and then, yeah, again, COVID hit. And so then I was like back to the drawing board. I'm like, hey, what am I going to do here? There's got to be something out there. And that's where the book was born, where I went and I was doing my visualization practice. I had just moved into this house in Lake Country, and which is like between Vernon and Kelowna. And that's when I kind of had the light bulbs going off again. And I thought about the book. And because it had always been a side project, uh, through that burn injury, to come back and play, because I mean, no one, and I never, not even my parents truly, like, they were with me in the beginning, but when I went to Vernon, they didn't, no one really knew what I was going through and what I was putting my body through. And so I remember that all of my teammates were like, this is insane, man. Like, you got to write a book about this. Like, this is crazy. And I just kind of brushed it off, but it had always been a side project in the back of my head, that I was like, yeah, maybe I'll do that one day. That could be kind of fun. And then with life after hockey, I had this realization of, you know yeah, it might be an entertaining story, but I could help people in terms of like just relating, um, to the story and to the journey, right? And I made a decision that I was going to write this book, and I started putting pen to paper, and I got about halfway through it. And that's when I had this other realization with the visualization practice. And I'm like, it was almost like a slap in the face, and be like, this is what you should have been doing all these years, is, teaching people, the power of the mind, and the visualization practice, that had it had gotten me all these different things, and in places I wanted to go in life. And so I launched my coaching business there, and through that started doing a lot more speaking. And that's a bigger part of my business, is just a lot of keynote speaking, inspirational talks, and workshops and things like that to different teams, and corporate things. And yeah, that's where it's led me. And it's, yeah, again, when I retired, I never in that moment knew this is where I'd be. But even on that bike ride, I knew there was something like this out there, right? And here we are, fast forward, 6 years later. So again, it didn't happen overnight, but
One of the things that is always amazing to me, and this is sort of what this show was born out of too, is that, when you help other people, you are in a way helping yourself too, most of the time, not always, but there is something that, like, when we talk to somebody like you or, some of the other guests we've talked to, and I always come out of it so inspired. And I hope that there are people out there that watch our show and feel inspired too. I know some of them talk to us about it, but I find like, this is sort of our way of helping people is by, spreading these stories. And I hope we are, but in the end, we're being helped too by it. Cause there's so much that I've learned more in the last year than I've learned my entire life, just from talking to people like
right.
you,
Yeah.
just more about myself, the world, how I react to things, how I parent, all of those things. And it's incredible.
I mean, you just hear all these stories about people leaving, good paying jobs because it's like, this can't be it. Like,
Yeah.
I chased this because that was the first mountain and that was the self. But I have this calling to like something bigger and I want to be of service. And, if you find something that you love to do through that, then it doesn't become about the money anymore. I mean, that just comes even with, living a life of service and, being passionate about that.
I didn't go through the kind of trauma that you went through, but I went through something that was at least traumatic to me. And I do feel like I owe something to other people, but I also think that like I have so much more room to make more of an impact on the world. And I can't really describe it, but that's how I feel.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's, very fitting to what we're talking about and this second mountain, right, of being of service for sure.
When people tune into this episode, what are they going to take from it?
I mean, I hope that when they listen to it, people just have the realization of, maybe starting something or changing something and the realization of, the power of their mind and maybe it's time to, go right and direct and live this movie of what they want their life to look like. And that, the realization of maybe that thing is possible that I've maybe kissed goodbye, right? Or, just again, a new movie for what their life might look like.
Where can people find you, Aaron?
Yeah, everything's just my name. So website's aaronvolpatti.com. People can reach out on there. I have a contact form on there. Social media, I try and be on there as much as I can. I don't do the best job at it, but that's just all my name at Aaron Volpatti as well. So yeah, people can reach me. Instagram is usually the one I'm on if I'm on anything. I had Twitter. I'm not on there as much, but that or the website is the easiest.
It's amazing.
Nice.
Well, Aaron,
I'd also just like to mention the book Fighter. It's Amazon. Is that the main place to get that?
You might be able to find it in your local bookstore, but yeah, if not, Amazon is super easy.
It's such a good book. It's very it's incredibly inspiring, but it's really well written too. So I think anyone out there that's listening, you should pick up this book and check it out.
Thanks, guys. I mean, there's an audio book too for those people that are audio book people.
Awesome. Yeah. So it's Fighter Defying the NHL Odds is the full name of the book. So yeah, amazing. Aaron, thank you so much for sharing your story with all of us. We really appreciate all of your time and best of luck to you in the future.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, guys. It was a pleasure.